seminar, CES for European Studies seminar at JSIA. We are very glad to have Professor Dr. Christa Tobler from University of Basel. She is based in two institutes, one at the Institute of European Global Studies. We've had academics from the institute who've been very generous with their time come here, and also student exchange program with the Institute for European Global Studies. Professor Tobler is a professor of European law at the University of Basel as well as Leiden, the Netherlands. Her research work puts an emphasis on legal equality and discrimination both in economic and social law. Her second field of specialization is the legal relationship between European Union and Switzerland, and is very well published. A very interesting website of hers that offers some of these courses is futurelearn.com, which I invite you to visit under the courses of Switzerland Europe. And of course, she presents, beyond what she will speak, she will present the charts that are derivative of her research, and also will sort of be a pedagogical lesson for the faculty members here, because it might be a very interesting teaching tool for the field of EU law, as well as generally understanding the mammoth contexts of the EU law that we will hear from Professor Tobler today. So she's going to talk about Brexit, what is it about, and what it could mean for India. That's a very important thing, but this is a very important event, not only for Europe, but understand that multilateralism has its spillovers, and indeed this is of major importance not only of the economy but legally, socially, and of course we are going to hear from her what the consequences are and what she thinks the future may bring. So Professor Tobler, welcome to JSIA.
Thank you very much. Thank you for these very warm words of welcome. And indeed, by adding India to my title, I thought I should do something local as well, or at least try to do so, rather than only speak about a topic that may seem a bit exotic if you are in a totally different part of the world. But as we will see during the lecture, and I'm sure you are already aware, this is something that has, as you said, a spillover effect that goes far beyond the UK itself, the European continent, and really touches on many other countries as well. All right, here is my introduction. You just heard that the main topic, the main part of the topic is this Brexit thing, one of the hottest issues of European law and politics, and it does have effects also outside, even here in India, actually for almost any country that has some sort of relations with Europe, trade-wise, for example. Now, when you ask yourself what Brexit means, I decided to take a very simple definition that the British broadcasting company, the BBC, provides. It says it is a word that has become used as a shorthand of saying the UK leaving the EU, merging the words Britain and exit to get Brexit. It's of course politically speaking not entirely correct, because Great Britain is larger than Britain. Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but it has become a totally accepted term, and you may have read in the media that other exits have also been debated in the past years. The Grexit, that was about leaving the currency, and all sorts of, even Schwexit about Switzerland has been debated, even though it's not even a part of it. So you have all these terms coming up just to try to grasp with one term something that is so complicated that you're grateful if you have one term that in a way encompasses the whole problem. What am I going to talk about? I will very briefly introduce myself. Good afternoon to you, my much esteemed audience. Since I assume that perhaps not everyone is dealing with the European Union all the time, I will take a brief moment to touch upon the question of what is the EU and what about EU membership. Why did the UK vote in favor of leaving? And I'm grateful to have a UK person here as well, who might have something to say about this also. What is the procedure for exiting the EU? That's the legal question of the Brexit. And what might be the consequences for India in particular economically and socially. So that is the program, and I want to thank you for being here and for sharing this time with us. So introducing myself, I am indeed a Swiss national. What you see at the right-hand side at the top is the shape of my country, and taking the flag also to impose it on it. In fact, Switzerland is a very, very, very tiny country if compared with India, and not nearly as complicated. It has a number of languages and a number of cultures, but it's not quite as rich as India is in that respect. So it's a very different world, really. I work and I live in 2 European countries, as you have already heard, the Netherlands and Switzerland. You see in the picture on the left-hand side the traditional historic building of Leiden University, where we have our Auditorium Maximum. That is actually a former monastery. That is why it looks a bit like a church. That is the origin of Leiden University. And at the right-hand side, you have the Europa Institute, or Institute for European Global Studies in Switzerland, in Basel, where I am based as well. You heard about my specializations. European Union law is my official field of work. When we say European law, that's actually larger than the European Union, because Europe is larger than these 28 countries that make up the Union. And you heard also about the 2 other issues that I'm focusing on, so I'm not going to say much more about that. So very briefly as a background, what about the EU and what about membership? As you may know, the history of the European Union goes back to the 1950s, when 3 so-called European communities were founded, were set up by then only 6 member states. And the wish was very consciously to set up a new type of international organization, much stronger than traditional international organizations. And that is actually what makes the EU special even today, after a long history. You cannot easily compare it to any other traditional international organization. In particular, its legal system is much, much, much stronger, notably on the level of enforcement. So if the law is not respected, there are real means to try to achieve enforcement of these rules. One of the 3 communities is still in existence. That is the European Atomic Energy Community, sometimes also called Euratom. The other 2 have either stopped to exist. There was one that was set up only for 50 years, the Coal and Steel Community, and the 3rd one, the former European Economic Community, was finally merged into the European Union. So we have today a system where we still have one of these original communities, and we have the European Union, which grew out of this complicated system. We have today 28 member states, and to put it very simple, the main idea of the European Union is that if you do things together, you are stronger than if you do it on your own. I put this deliberately in not a technical way. It's just that in a continent like Europe, which is not very large in Asian standards, but you can imagine these borders all being very close together, you have a lot of problems, cross-border problems, that you can save really a lot more easily if you do it together. Think of environmental issues, for example, or even the migration issues these days. If you have a sort of a common approach, it becomes easier than if every country does something in a totally uncoordinated manner. So that's why I'm saying they hope to be stronger together. Not everything works beautifully, we know that. The EU is in a situation of a multiple crisis at the moment, but nevertheless, that is the basic idea. Important fields of action. This is important to understand or to recall briefly, because it is part of the background of the whole Brexit discussion. There is one important historical starting point, and that is that in the beginning, in the 1950s, the aim was one of economic cooperation on a very strong level in order to achieve a more noble aim, namely stability, peace, welfare for the people, but the means was clearly an economic aim. And this economic aim found an expression in something that we call today the internal market, which at the time was called the common market. And that is about creating an area without internal borders as far as possible, to make it possible that persons, goods, services, capital can move between these countries. An internal market consists of these famous four freedoms: the free movement of goods, persons, services, and capital. That's an essential thing. It is still a core element of the European Union, and I should say a largely undisputed one. Whatever may be the points of criticism about many other policy areas, that is largely undisputed, though we will see in the context of Brexit that the immigration issue, especially the movement issue of people even within the Union, some people see that in a critical manner. Now today we have a lot more than that historical starting point. We don't only have this now internal market. We have a large and long list of common policy areas. I mentioned just a few of those here. We have a common trade policy, meaning that the European Union concludes agreements with non-member states. We have, I already touched upon it, common rules on environmental protection, for example. We have cooperation in the fields of international and internal security. We have even a monetary union for some countries. This is a field where not everybody participates. At the present, we have 19 member states sharing a common currency called the euro, which is one of the crisis elements, as you know, if you think about the situation in countries like Greece, for example, totally unresolved and overlooked at the moment, I think, because it's being overshadowed by other crises like the Brexit, like the migration problem, but it has not gone away. It's still there, and it's no better, I must tell you, no better than when it started. What about membership? I have already said that we started with 6 member states. We now have 28 member states, and so far we have seen only so-called accessions. That means states joining this enterprise. We've seen it in several rounds, and what you see here at the right-hand side is a commemorative stamp of the Swiss neighbor country, Austria. When Austria joined, there was a popular vote on this issue, and then 20 years later, in order to celebrate that anniversary, this particular stamp was made. Red, white, red is the flag of Austria. On the left-hand side, of course, you see part of the European Union flag. In the middle, you see a dove, and I would imagine that that is because officially the main and most noble overarching aim of the European Union is still to preserve peace on the continent. Okay, so only accessions, and even though we have these multiple crises at the moment, there are still countries that wish to join. We have a list of candidate states, of potential candidate states, especially in the southern part of Europe, the Balkan area. Some of these procedures are very, very difficult, with Turkey, for example, where we don't see any realistic conclusion in the near future. But then when we come to the country that is of crucial interest for this particular lecture, the United Kingdom, then we have to say that, first of all, it was not a founding state of the European communities in the 1950s. It's a quite well-known fact that former Prime Minister Sir Winston Churchill had suggested the creation of what he called a kind of United States of Europe, but he didn't think about the UK in those terms. He very consciously excluded that. He was thinking about the continent, because after all, it was on the continent, especially the tensions between France and Germany, that had created a very difficult situation in Europe with 2 world wars and other wars before, and devastation and unhappiness and disaster, essentially. So he had suggested that, but the UK was not part of this enterprise. Nevertheless, and that is what for political science people is a fascinating fact, from the 1960s on, the UK said, after all, we could join. And then was the problem that France said no, having the idea that the UK was not really mature for Europe. So the then President de Gaulle of France blocked accession of the UK, and the UK acceded to the then European communities only in 1973. Since then, it has been a very respected member. Not always an easy one, because it had its special issues and its special attitudes, but I think it has enriched in particular also the legal system of the European Union in a very, very meaningful ways. If you look at the contribution that the courts of the United Kingdom have made to the development of European Union law, it's quite amazing. We have lots of leading cases that originate from the United Kingdom courts, went to the European Court of Justice. Very respected member with certain special deals. I'm not going into the details here, but even now it is so that the UK enjoys special position in certain policy fields with opt-in, opt-out clauses and not being part of it at all, like the currency, for example. But what now is looming, of course, and for the very first time we have had this problem, and that is this Brexit, the idea of leaving the European Union. We have had not a single withdrawal so far from the European Union. There have been debates and certain governments have said actually we could leave, we should leave, but it has never happened. As for voting on this issue, in 1975, and I just said before it was in 1973 that the UK had joined, and then shortly after that, for political reasons, a vote, an advisory vote, a referendum was organized with the question I've put here. Do you think the United Kingdom should stay in the European Community (Common Market? Please note that that is a relatively clear question. A common market, I said, is about this free movement of the four factors that I had mentioned. And that is a much more narrow question than what we have had today, namely, should we leave the European Union? Well, at the time, 2/3 voted in favor of staying. If you look back at history, it really raises a very interesting legal question. If the people had voted in favor, and if the government had followed that advisory vote at the time, would it at all have been possible to leave? You can ask the question because at the time the community treaties did not contain clauses about leaving again. We didn't have that. We just had clauses about how to join. Nobody could imagine, and nobody wanted to imagine, that one of the states would leave again. So there were no rules about it. However, do not forget that behind such an organization like today the European Union and the communities, there is international law, public international law, and under the rules of public international law, I think there is no doubt that one can leave an international organization. If you're interested in that, please read the editorial by one of my Dutch colleagues, Professor Wessels, in the International Organization's Law Review of last year. Now, we are approaching our subject from a legal point of view because today the situation is different. The EU Treaty, which is the fundamental document of the European Union, does contain a specific withdrawal clause. And I will come to that clause in a moment. But before doing that, let's say just a little bit about this vote. It was a vote, an advisory vote, held, as I'm sure you know very well, last year in June. And here you see the question: should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the European Union? One problem of this vote is that there was a narrow majority in favor of leaving. You can see it here, just slightly above 50%. So you have a very unequal outcome. You have a very large part of the electorate which said, actually, we do not want to leave. But 51.9 is more than 50. So in that sense, it was a vote in favor of leaving. Now, the United Kingdom is a rather complicated country with different parts, and you will also know that the outcome has been different in different parts of the country. It's a well-known fact that Scotland, for example, there a large majority voted in favor of staying rather than leaving. And that has led to tensions, political and legal difficulties within the country itself, because what do you then do with a vote like that if one part or certain parts of the country are very clearly opposed and then feel overruled, so to speak, by the others? A little bit about the background, and I'm keeping it very simple here. I think it's safe to say that the reason why this vote was held at all was party politics. The former Prime Minister, David Cameron, had problems within his own party because views differed as to what attitude to take towards the European Union. And he promised actually to hold a vote, hoping to finally unite his party on this difficult issue and to put this issue behind him. Because it's not fruitful if you have to spend all this energy on a divisive issue like that all the time. He also hoped, or rather promised to the people, that he could get a better deal in this way. And indeed, we know that there have been political discussions. A certain political deal was hammered out in February 2016, but it didn't go nearly as far as what Mr. Cameron originally had in mind. And even though he then put a brave face on it and tried to convince people that that was an ideal deal, that did not work. So what I also find quite interesting, if you look at the arguments, and one of the core arguments of the Prime Minister is an argument that you see all over Europe in certain directions of politics. It is the argument of an unsustainable level of immigration, that too many people, non-UK people, come into the country and put pressure on the infrastructure, meaning you need more schools, more hospitals, more streets, more of everything, and that would cost too much and the country would be overwhelmed with all these people. It's an argument that you find in nationalist parties in many other parts of Europe. So the UK is not alone in that, we have to say very clearly. You could also see it in Switzerland. In Switzerland, we have a party, a right-wing party, nationalist party, that brought what we call a constitutional initiative. You can collect signatures and propose a vote on the constitutional level. That happened in 2014. Very same argument, and the Swiss people said, yes, we don't like that much immigration anymore, which caused an own kind of legal problems because we have a free movement of persons agreement with the European Union. But that is not today's subject matter. What you see at the right-hand side in the picture, you may recognize the shape of Switzerland again. This was an advertisement used by this party when campaigning in favor of the vote to limit immigration. And you see all these traffic signs. It's a traffic sign that signals attention, attention, attention. And what you perhaps cannot see so well are the black parts where it always says in addition, in addition, in addition, zusätzlich, zusätzlich. And it's trying to tell us that we need, as I said, more schools, more houses, more roads, more train, more infrastructure, and that is unsustainable. So you can see a very clear parallel between the debate in the UK, only that there it came from the government side and was eagerly taken up by many others, and in other parts of Europe. Why did the UK vote in favor of leaving? Well, this has been the subject matter of a very interesting analysis in the country and elsewhere. But it seems that the Leave campaign did have very attractive arguments. The best known probably is this idea of taking our country back, to win back the sovereignty. Because after all, if you are a member of an organization like the European Union and you decide to do things together, it means that you are not deciding on your own on important issues, rather you do it on a higher level together. I personally always think that what happens in the European Union is a pooling of sovereignty. Most people, the critical people, say you give away your sovereignty, you limit it, but you can also see it as we pool it on a higher level and we exercise it together. That is, of course, not always easy, and the outcome will not always be that what you might have decided on your own. But here you have this argument of taking your country back to be fully sovereign again. And the argument was also made that then we can have our own laws and courts again. It will no longer be EU law, it will no longer be the Court of Justice of the European Union who will tell us what to do in the fields covered by EU law. We would be fully sovereign again. That seems to have been an extremely attractive argument for the people who voted in favor of leaving. And then immigration, I just mentioned it, one of the big trans-European arguments. The argument was that then we can do what we wish again on our own. We can limit it and we can keep other people out, and that would be nice. One argument also was money. It will cost a lot less, it was said. I think one of the attractive arguments for many people was that the money then could be used elsewhere, directly in favor of the people, for example, for the national healthcare system. Even though the moment the vote had happened, politicians said, actually, we can't do that. So things that had been promised, even the day after, were already revoked. And what is perhaps the most telling picture, or the most telling statement, is that it was said, well, and as for the future, when we have to reorganize our relationship with the European Union, we will have a much better deal. And the picture that was used was actually, we will have our cake and eat it. Of course, that is impossible. You can either have your cake or you can eat your cake, but you cannot have it and eat it at the same time. So it's quite surprising that something so obviously impossible has been put forward as an argument and was clearly believed by many, many, many people. This is not a very sophisticated analysis, as you can see, but I'm just touching upon a few things that may help us to understand it. Now, as for this procedure, I said before, we have now a provision on withdrawal from the European Union. The reason why we have it is the latest large revision of the EU basic documents, the EU treaties. It's a so-called Lisbon revision, called like that because the document was signed in the Portuguese city of Lisbon. These revised treaties then entered into force on the 1st of December 2009, and part of these revisions was this new Article 50 of the Treaty on European Union. That is, as I said, the basic document of the European Union. This article, as we know, was introduced not with the idea that states should actually withdraw, but for political reasons, to make it easier for some a bit more critical member states to agree to this Lisbon revision. They said, look, if you really don't like it in the long run, you can always leave. But it wasn't meant to be put in practice. Nobody believed it would ever be put in practice, and everybody hoped that it would never be put in practice. From a legal point of view, it's interesting to note that this Article 50 really refers to two distinct legal orders. One is national law, the other one is EU law. So you will read in the first paragraph, any member state may decide to withdraw from the Union in accordance with its own constitutional requirements. And paragraph 2 says that a member state which decides to withdraw shall notify the European Council of its intention. And I will say something about who is the European Council in a moment. From there on, including this paragraph 2, the rest of the provision deals with the EU procedure on the level of the EU. So you have to see that on the one hand you have an internal decision making which follows the national rules, and on the other hand then you have the EU rules on how it goes on from the moment on when a country has decided to leave. This is an untested process because we have had the provision only for a number of years and it has never ever been used. So I'm going to explain to you a little bit in more detail this issue of the exiting procedure. There are really three fundamental issues that the country has to think about if it reflects about leaving. One is, how do we decide internally on withdrawing from the EU, the national level? Then how does the withdrawal procedure work on the EU level? And finally, a political issue that will usually also need legal regulation: what about the future relationship? And I will explain that by using a number of charts, which I understand you have been sent electronically. And you can see them actually here. Let me see. You said I should press escape,
No,
didn't you?
that was for the PowerPoint. So the
I'm sorry.
PDF, you just need to go to this bar here.
Okay, sorry.
have the other
There we go. Yeah, they look like that. So you have them in your, but then we have to close this, because otherwise...
You don't need to close it.
If you hit Alt-Tab, it'll switch.
Yeah.
All right, so here they are. It's 4 charts, and if you look at the first one, just look at the titles that you see in the lower level. It's larger than that. You will see the 3 issues that I mentioned. Internal decision making, arrangements with the Union for the withdrawal, that is the exiting procedure, and framework for the future relationship with the Union. So these are the 3 issues we are going to discuss. I'm sorry, now I have to get back to here we go. These Brexit charts can actually be found on this website that is indicated here. You can download them for free. We are updating them regularly when something new is happening, so please follow it. This is a project that tries to use certain graphical elements in order to present knowledge about the European Union law to students, for example, but also to professionals. The background is that if you study textbooks on European Union law, you are faced with huge books of more than 1,000 pages, usually just text. And I've made the experience that my students, especially my international students who have to struggle with a new cultural environment, a new educational environment, a new language, and on top a new subject matter, they get lost and they can't see the structure behind the whole thing. So what we try to provide is structure in this manner. Now, the Brexit charts were made after the book that you can see here was published, because the Brexit issue arose only last year. This book is now in your library, together with a small text booklet, so if you're interested, you can find it here in your university. So this is what I'm going to use to discuss a few things. And I'm not going to the charts to show you the individual details all the time, but you can see here which charts you can look at in order to see the details. So I said the first issue is the internal decision making. And I quoted already Article 50, paragraph 1, which says that any member state may decide to withdraw from the Union in accordance with its own constitutional requirements. If we now take the example of the UK, the only one we have, then this vote, this referendum vote, was organized on the basis of a law called the European Union Referendum Act. Particularly important issue was then, okay, if you then get this vote, and if a majority of people says yes, who is then actually going to decide on withdrawal? Because please remember, it is an advisory vote. It is not a vote like the ones we have in Switzerland, where if a vote is being taken, it will change the law by itself. But this was an advisory vote, and then somebody has to take action, either following it or not following it. So who makes that decision? You know probably quite well from following the media that the government's opinion, especially the new Prime Minister Theresa May, the government's opinion was that this was part of the so-called royal prerogative. That is that because it's external relations, that is a matter for the government to decide. So the idea was the government by itself can decide on this matter and then notify the European Union about the decision. This led to a heated political and public debate, also in academic circles, and we all learned a lot about UK constitutional law, reading all these blogs and these articles on what this means. Eventually, the issue had to be decided by the courts. There were a number of cases going to high courts, eventually going to Supreme Court. 3 cases were joined, though you will usually hear in the media only one name, that's the name of Miller. But the case of Miller is actually the case of Miss Miller and Mr. Dos Santos. And then there were two other cases, the Inyu case and the McCourt case. And on the website of the Supreme Court, you can find very helpfully all information you would like to have about those three cases. And then 24th of January of this year, the Supreme Court handed down its decision. And one question, not the only one, but one major question was this question of who can decide? Is it the government on its own, or do we need action from the Parliament and then also action from which Parliament? Because we have the UK Parliament in Westminster and we have the so-called devolved assemblies, which are regional parliaments, for example, in Scotland or for example in Northern Ireland. I mentioned already the complex nature of the UK's constitutional setup. So I think the most important statement, and it's really interesting to read that decision, I would invite you to do so, you can easily find it on the website, but the most basic statement is what I have quoted here, I think, where the court has said, where implementation of a referendum result requires a change in the law, and statute, like this Referendum Act, has not provided for that change, the change must be made through parliamentary legislation. And the court noted specifically that this means the UK Parliament, the one for the whole country, the one in Westminster, not the devolved assemblies, which had also been a question in especially the Northern Irish cases. Now, what about this, the change in the national law? It requires a change in the law. The UK, famously, is a so-called dualist country, meaning that when it signs up to international law, it takes an extra step to bring that law within the UK legal system. And for the European communities and later the Union, it did so with the European Communities Act 1972, which was later amended. This brings EU law into national law. It creates, in fact, a new source of law in doing so. And that is also the basis for recognizing the primacy of EU law over national law. So this law, and with it a lot of other things tied to it, of course, that is the national law which must be changed. If the UK leaves, then you also have to change that act, of course. And essentially, I put it very simply, the Supreme Court said, look, we have here an issue of national law. It's not just a government decision, so Parliament must decide about it as well. So this led to this famous Brexit Bill. The government, rather reluctantly, because it had hoped that it wouldn't have to do so and could decide entirely on its own, the government submitted a draft text in January, which was then debated in the two chambers of the UK Parliament. And you can see all the details about this on the website of the Parliament. Really quite interesting. In the end, all proposed amendments were voted down. The Brexit Bill was adopted in its original rather simple form in March, and it also obtained royal consent, also in March. You have here a picture of the Westminster Parliament building, and here is the text of the Brexit Bill. The title is A Bill to Confer Power on the Prime Minister to Notify, under Article 52 of the Treaty on European Union, the United Kingdom's intention to withdraw from the EU. The main part is what I have highlighted in red. The Prime Minister may notify the United Kingdom's intention to withdraw from the Union. So in this way, the Parliament empowers the Prime Minister to do so. The abbreviated title of this act is the European Union Notification of Withdrawal Act 2017. Right, so that is the national side, and that was complicated enough, you would say. But we have concluded that phase, so to speak, and now comes the next complication, because now we move from the national level to the EU level. On the EU level, I have already mentioned that in this Article 52 it says the member state which has decided, following its internal rules, to withdraw shall then notify the European Council of its intention. Who is the European Council? It is the top political institution of the European Union, composed of the heads of state and government, the European Council President and the Commission President. So these are these meetings, these top meetings where you read about Miss Merkel meeting with all these other important people on the top level. The Council, the European Council's task, according to the EU Treaty, is to define the broad political guidelines as to in what direction the Union is moving. Not the nitty-gritty things about regulations, directives and all of that, but the big lines. Well, this council needs to be notified. In practice, of course, the notification goes to the president, which is Mr. Donald Tusk. Prime Minister May of the UK had announced that she would actually send the notification letter on the 29th of March. That was kind of her in the circumstances, since just briefly before that the European Union was celebrating with a lot of pomp 60 years anniversary of two of these original community treaties that were signed in Rome, the so-called Rome treaties, and the idea was not to overshadow those events by this notification letter. It did actually happen on the 29th, that is not too long ago. It's a document of several pages addressed to Dear President Tusk, and you can find the document on many websites, for example here, UK Reuters press agency. Core elements, you will not be surprised to have the sentence, I hereby notify. Please note there are two red parts. There is the intention to withdraw from the European Union. There is also the intention, see below, to withdraw from the European Atomic Energy Community, which I told you is the one remaining surviving third community of the original three communities. So for both of these, Prime Minister May has said, we will withdraw. And then for the rest, the letter sets out the UK government's approach to the discussions about the UK's departure, the so-called divorce from the EU, and then also about the future, as she puts it, the deep and special partnership that the UK hopes to enjoy with the EU once it will leave. Right, here we come to a particularly interesting legal question. Now this notification letter has been sent. Could it be withdrawn? Could you, if now things become really difficult, could you say at some point, actually, we are thinking better, or we have had a second vote, for example, and we want to withdraw it, and after all we want to stay? I'm not sure that politically that is at all a feasible approach, but legally speaking it's an interesting question. You can ask it both on the national level, you know, if you have at the internal decision making, can you reverse that? But you can also ask it on the EU level. So does EU law as such allow a reversal? It's totally unresolved, it's much debated. You can find a lot about it. It's a nice topic for a paper, a term paper, for example. There's lots of academic writing about it. There is also something called the Three Knights opinion, because of the authors writing this document, three are sirs, like the former Sir Judge Edward of the Court of Justice, former Sir Francis Jacobs, former Advocate General of the Court of Justice, and others, who wrote a lengthy paper about this issue. And quite thrilling, there is a Dublin tax lawyer, you see him there, cocky looking, a tax lawyer, not an EU lawyer, who thinks that this whole issue should be put to the courts, and who wanted to bring a case and is in the process of bringing a case with the one and only aim to raise this issue in the end before the Court of Justice of the European Union in Luxembourg. If that case ever reaches that court, I'm not sure what it is going to do about it. You have seen already parts of the text of this Article 50. It doesn't tell you anything about this question. And how would you decide?
Is the case asking to revoke previously, or just asking the court to weigh on could it be?
Yes, it's just asking, could it be revoked? Yeah, because Mr. McLaughlin is of McMahon, however you pronounce it correctly, it's an Irish name. He's of the opinion that this question is too important in the whole procedure. You should know whether or not you can revoke it or whether it's non-revocable in order to make a decision in the end in what direction to go. So you see, a much debated, totally unresolved issue. If it ever comes to the Court of Justice, I do not envy that court because it has no basis whatsoever on how to decide, other than perhaps saying, after all, for the European Union, it would be better if the member state stays. So it should be possible to reverse, but there is no legal basis, no materials, nothing on which you can go back in order to form an opinion on this very interesting issue. All right, we have covered internal decision making, we have covered the notification to the European Union of the decision, and now we come to the next step, which is negotiations. This is a cartoon that was published a few weeks ago in The Economist, a British publication, and it says in the bubble here, it says, now for a snappy exit. And you see Britain, personalized with a large bag of money, stepping out of the EU back to Britain, cocky, clear, sure. And then you see what, according to The Economist, will happen under the title of negotiations. We have a shark opening his mouth and all the money is gone. And it kind of illustrates the expectation that that is not going to be an easy thing. So about these negotiations, if you continue in Article 50, paragraph 2, after the notification issue, it says, in the light of the guidelines provided by the European Council, the Union shall negotiate and conclude an agreement with that state. We'll come to the content of the agreement in a moment. So the point now is to negotiate an agreement with that state. A reference is made to Article 218, paragraph 3 of another treaty, the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. You can see in the lower part that is in fact a revised and renamed version of the previous treaty of the third of the original communities, the EEC community that was later called only EC community. And here it says the Commission shall submit recommendations to the Council shall adopt the decision authorizing the opening of negotiations and nominating the Union negotiator. So the practical steps are these. First of all, negotiation guidelines have to be prepared. EU Council President Tusk drafts the negotiations, and he said he would do that within 48 hours after the UK notification. Then a special Brexit summit will be held some weeks later because the member states must formally approve these guidelines. On the basis of these guidelines, a mandate is given to the European Commission, one of the institutions, the Commission will put forward recommendations. The Council hands the formal mandate, and then the negotiations begin, once the mandate has been given, on both sides, obviously. The Commission has said that the negotiations should actually be concluded by October 2018, because otherwise there wouldn't be enough time to stay within a 2-year time limit, to which we will come a bit later. Where are we at the moment? Now, interestingly, since the notification letter was sent, we have for the first time on the website of the European Council a part on Brexit. So far you could look in vain. There was nothing, because from the European Union's point, nothing had happened until the notification arrived. Now it has arrived, and now you can see on this website a timeline, steps, everything that's happening. And what has happened now is the issue and the priorities have to be determined to determine the negotiation guidelines. That has happened. The draft was sent to the member states. The member states are now looking at it, and as I said, in a future Brexit summit, they will have to approve them. The priorities, according to the media, which have seen, they're not official, but media always manage to see things. Media that claim to have seen the document of Mr. Tusk say, you read there that there are 3 priorities in particular: to create certainty for the EU citizens caught up in Brexit, That means UK people who are in other EU countries or vice versa, or companies also who have made use of EU right, what will be their position? Second, to settle a financial bill for the UK. The EU's rather unwelcome stance from a UK point of view is that actually the UK has committed to all sorts of things while being a member, and it cannot just simply step out of that. It will be presented with a very large bill. And that is a point you have to negotiate as well. And then there is the problem of Northern Ireland. Ireland is, on the one hand, an EU member state on its own, but its very northern part is part of the UK. So what do you do with that land border, and what do you do against the background of the former very complicated conflict that we had on that island? So this is another priority. So what will now happen is that according to this document, there will be first the divorce settlement to negotiate. Once we have sufficient progress on that, one can also begin to talk about a future framework. And then, because it is expected that it takes a long time to ratify such a framework, especially because it has to go into all the individual member states as well, it is also stated that we should have some sort of transitional arrangements so that we do not have all of a sudden a hole into which everybody will fall, legally speaking. I think you begin to see that this is a very complex matter, even just if you look at the pure legal framework. So, we have set negotiations. Imagine that the negotiations do come to a certain result, which is by no way guaranteed. It could also be that you cannot agree. But the treaty says, and you see here, that if this agreement has been negotiated, it should be concluded. And it's also said how the voting would happen. But as I said, note, there is absolutely no guarantee that a political agreement can be reached between the parties on the divorce settlement, and then a future arrangement is another thing yet again. If you look at our charts, you will see that, in fact, if no agreement is reached, there will nevertheless be a Brexit. And that is what in the UK is sometimes referred to as the cliff edge scenario, where you fall over a cliff without any kind of regulatory framework as to how it should happen. What would be in the withdrawal agreement, if you can agree on one? According to the treaty, it should set out the arrangements for the withdrawal. Here I have a few suggestions as what might be in it: transitional rules in various policy areas, maintenance of certain rights. It's what we have heard before as a priority. All these people, all these companies who have made use of EU rights and whose position should be protected somehow. Think also about EU officials with the UK nationality. Lots of people are working in Brussels or elsewhere. What will happen with them? Do they immediately lose their jobs? What about their pensions? All sorts of awkward problems come up here, and they have to do with human beings. It's not just theory, it has to do with the lives and the livelihoods of people. It's an important thing. Will we have an EU embassy in London and the other way around? I think that's also something one has to think about. What about this exit bill that we mentioned, and numerous other issues? Right. I said before, we have negotiations, we have possibly a conclusion of an agreement, but you can also imagine that there is no conclusion of an agreement. That without an agreement, these 2 years that the treaty mentions pass. You go on and to read in Article 50, in paragraph 3, the treaties shall cease to apply to the state in question from the date of entry into force of the withdrawal agreement, so if you can agree on one, or failing that, and that is if you cannot agree, 2 years after the notification referred to in paragraph 2, unless the European Council, in agreement with the member state concerned, unanimously decides to extend this period. So you see that in principle there is a 2-year period that is the kind of a deadline, and even if you agree on nothing, in theory, after these 2 years, there is the end of this membership. And please also note, when it says the treaties shall cease to apply, that doesn't mean only the EU treaty, the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, but in fact everything linked to them. And EU law is today a huge body of law. Based on these two treaties, you have thousands of additional legal instruments, regulations, directives, decisions, lots and lots of court decisions from Luxembourg. All of this is in fact also included. So this raises numerous questions and concerns. And as I said, and once again, it's really one that is at the core of attention, what will happen to persons and companies who so far have exercised rights? Well, I'll just give you two examples to think about. Of course, depending on your point of view, you can see the outcome either in a positive way or in a negative way. Always. And politics will make use of that. Take one of the core elements of the internal market, the free movement of persons, meaning that natural people and also companies can go to other member states and be active there economically or even not economically under certain conditions. You could put take a positive approach and say, well, once we're out and this doesn't apply anymore, the UK can make totally its own choices in the field of immigration. Great. After all, that was one of the big issues in the vote. But you can also say, well, it will make it for other EU nationals and perhaps also for other third country nationals much more difficult to enter the UK. And for the UK, a big question is, will it find enough qualified labour? Think about one of the critical areas, healthcare. No healthcare system in Europe, in Western Europe, can live only with its own labour. In Basel, okay, we are in a border region, 40% of the employees of our university hospital are non-Swiss. 40%. It's not the same everywhere, of course, but I can guarantee you, without foreign labour, a national healthcare system cannot survive in Western Europe. That is very clear. So you see a huge issue here. Let's take another example, external relations. Treaties concluded by the EU with third states. You can put, again, a positive note on it. You can say, hooray, the UK can now conclude its own treaties, trade and investment treaties, for example, with India. We will come to that. But you can also say, okay, if you leave the EU, you will be threatened with lots of trade barriers and lots of work, because all of a sudden you're out of all these treaties that the EU has concluded, and you will want to renegotiate new treaties. My own country, Switzerland, has a net of agreements with the European Union. All of a sudden, the UK would no longer be part of it. That is a very, very far-reaching consequence. Just a brief word about the internal UK perspective of these legal consequences. Here you have a figure, a study by the Library of the Commons, one of the chambers of Parliament, had said that at present some 19,000 EU legal acts are in force. So what you do with them in the UK once you have withdrawn? Remember, they came into the UK legal system through the European Communities Act, as we amended. Now, Prime Minister May has said there will be a great repeal bill. It's a bit of a misnomer, because she says on the one hand it will repeal EU law in the UK, but at the same time most of it will be made proper national law. So you don't really repeal it, you actually bring it into your legal system more firmly. So that is quite a thing. Right, now we come to the question of, all right, if we have gone through this whole procedure and you've reached the point of the legal consequences which are whole EU law no longer applies, in principle, how could you address that issue? There are three legal avenues as to how to mitigate or address this kind of radical consequence that all of a sudden all EU law is gone. You could put certain things into the Withdrawal Agreement. For example, this issue of the legal position of people and companies who have already made use of rights. Please note, and you can see that on the charts, EU law does not contain a clause about guaranteeing such rights. This is different from, for example, the Free Movement of Persons agreement that Switzerland has with the EU, and it's mentioned on the chart. We have a clause which says if this agreement is being cancelled, then people are protected. And we don't have that in the EU, which means it must be an issue for negotiations, and that will be something for the withdrawal agreement. You can also put certain issues into a new alternative arrangement to try to kind of revive certain issues. And theoretically, the treaty mentions it, you could think better of the whole thing and decide to become a member again. But you can imagine that that kind of U-turn, politically speaking, would be very, very critical. And do remember, any kind of agreement will require consent. Take the issue of a future arrangement. The UK has said it wants a so-called bespoke agreement, that is a tailor-made deal, just for it, special, not following any kind of model. On our last chart, you see models that were actually mentioned in government documents, even in white papers and so forth, including the Switzerland model, the Norway model, the Singapore model, the Hong Kong model, and so forth. But no such model, they say. We want a very special agreement with as much access to the internal market as possible, but no free movement of persons, and no role for the European Court of Justice. The European Union, on the other hand, has hinted that you cannot have only parts of economic freedom, say the free movement of goods and services, but not also persons. I think that's a political position, because legally speaking, it's very well possible. They just don't want it. So how do you bring these totally opposing positions together? That is something that will have to happen through negotiations. And I, for one, I'm extremely curious as to what is coming out of this. Let me just say one more thing about this have your cake and eat it thing. Get everything. The government had presented a 12-point plan, a white paper mentioned on our charts that you can easily find on the internet as well. And it had said about ensuring free trade with European markets, we will not be seeking membership of the single market, but will pursue instead a new strategic partnership with the EU, including an ambitious and comprehensive free trade agreement and a new customs agreement. The critique by some people in the UK is that when the vote was held, and you saw the question before, it was just about membership of the European Union. People were not asked whether they also want to leave the single market. You could actually leave the EU and still be within the single market if you were to take the example of Norway, by going into the European Economic Area agreement instead through the EFTA agreement. So here we have a political choice made by the government saying we go out of it completely. Much debated. Or the issue of controlling immigration. The white paper says very grandly that as we leave the EU and embrace the world, openness to international talent will remain one of our most distinctive assets. I must tell you that that is not the message that third countries received even in the past few years, and I will come back to that when we will speak about India in a short while. So, approaching the end of this part, before we go on with India, what will be the result of all of this? We don't know. Time will have to tell. We have lots of interesting and challenging legal and political issues. In German, we say abwarten und Tee trinken, wait and drink tea, something that people do a lot in England, and you see here a beautiful Wedgwood cup for drinking tea. But if you work at the university or you study at the university, that should not be enough. Don't just sit there and wait. Think, reflect, do research. You can find out about things. And you can read what others have written. You can make comparisons. What do other third countries do in their relationship? And you can learn lots of things about it. You can publish these things. There are lots of interesting blogs and journals, and this might influence even the political discussion to a certain degree. Shall I ask whether there are questions on this point right now, or shall I go on with the India part and then?
Once you do the India part,
Very good.
We have 5 more minutes.
Okay, this is a shorter part. You will be relieved to hear. That is about what could it mean for India. Well, of course, that depends very much on the relations of India with the EU and with the UK. I will very briefly talk about those points and then ask the question, is this a threat or an opportunity for India? It's an important relationship between India and the EU. I read in the fact sheet of the Indian central government about EU-India relations that actually India was one of the first countries to establish diplomatic relations with the then European communities. So there has been a relationship for a long time. There have been cooperation agreements that were concluded, plus a number of more specific agreements on research, for example, and I will also come back to that. EU-Indian summits are held very regularly. A joint action plan has been adopted and subsequently revised. And since the year 2005, this relationship has been described as a strategic partnership. And you can find that also on the website of the European Commission, where it says India is currently the fastest growing economy in the world and a strategic partner for the EU. If you look more closely at trade relations, without going now into a lot of details, you can easily find them on the websites. The EU is India's #1 trading partner. That is very important. India, on the other hand, is EU's #9 trading partner. That is still very important. And what we can see in the last years are remarkable increases on different levels: trade in services, exports, investment, and so forth. So it's a dynamic relationship, also economically speaking. I mentioned these cooperation agreements. They were concluded first in 1973, then in 1981, and now the aim has been for a while something much more ambitious, namely a comprehensive free trade agreement. That would be one of the most significant trade agreements ever concluded, given the size of the partners and the importance. The negotiations cover a lot of issues, such as access to each other's markets, framework for investment, rules that frame trade in a larger sense, such as intellectual property law, competition law, sustainable development, even environmental, social, and labor rights. This is under negotiation. You can see this began in 2007 and has been a long time. It seems to be difficult to come to a certain conclusion. But it's going on. In the meantime, India continues to enjoy unilateral trade preferences under an internal EU system. What about the UK? A difficult past, as you are well aware, and the question is whether there will be a more promising future. Of course, in this particular case, we have the colonial system of the past, which I personally consider a European sin, an unpardonable European sin, from which many countries have suffered, not just India. Today, the relationship with the UK is still a special one, but on a different level, more eye to eye, which is much better. You have the special situation of the Commonwealth, which is something that in other colonial contexts or post-colonial contexts we do not have. But what is interesting, if you look at the trade relations, I was much intrigued to learn that in fact the UK is not the prime trade partner within the European Union of India. India trades more with Germany than with the UK. The UK there is only number 12. But the UK is a very large investor in India, and the other way around. UK attracts more Indian investment than the rest of the EU together. That's very, very significant. Lots of Indian companies in the UK, and here comes the key word. The UK is used at present as a gateway to the rest of the EU, because once you are in, you can use this as a basis to then go on and also trade with other countries. And this will immediately show you the challenge. If the UK leaves, what will then happen?